offers through the Karl König Institute a series of 52 online talks about the calendar of the soul as it can be experienced through what I like to call the portals of Karl Koenig's drawings. And that is now available in English and German and Italian and Chinese. So, and the weekly talks are about 20 to 25 minutes, and there are 2 longer introductory talks. So if you're interested in that, also email us at office@karlköniginstitute.org. And I am so grateful that we can turn to this theme today, the fire, the foundation stone, and the calendar of the soul, and in the light of the calendar of the soul. In this year when all of us in our hearts are turning to these deep experiences of the events of 100 years ago and asking, what does it mean for us today and for our future? And therefore, I'm very happy that Richard will be speaking about this in the light of the calendar of the soul, to which he has really devoted in a central way his life's work, along with being the founder and CEO of the Karl König Institute. And what those of you who have heard Richard speak know is that it's not only illuminating, but it's an experience where we can come to it through the understanding of the heart. So, Richard, welcome and thank you for giving this lecture today.
Thank you, Deborah. I do always try that she doesn't embarrass me before I start, but there you go. It's so nice to be back in Chicago and to meet everybody who's not in Chicago, but we're all joined from this impulse from Chicago, which I think is really wonderful. So thank you for this invitation, and thank you all for coming to Chicago this evening or this morning or whatever time it happens to be for you. Here it's dark already. And of course, I'm sure all of you have been to some events or occupied yourself also with the question of these 100 years since the fire of the Goetheanum and since the Christmas Foundation meeting. There's been so much happening around the world about this event. I think that's so important too, that we join hands around the world in turning to these events. But you know, the world is quite used to celebrating 100 years of something, or 75 years, or 500 years, or whatever, because it's a round number, and that is actually not the reason why we celebrate 100 years. It's something completely different. So I would like to start with that, because I just like to point to the fact that we're not celebrating 100 years, but we're celebrating 3 times 33 1/3 years, which is, of course, 100. And nevertheless, it is something completely different. And it has to do with this historic cycle that Rudolf Steiner pointed to himself. And of course, it is the number of years that the Christ being spent on the earth and in connecting to the Jesus children. So we have this 30-year period leading up to the birth point of the Christ. We have, so to speak, the birth of the Jesus children, which is Christmas, of course, and then a 30-year period until the event of the baptism, where the Christ being is born. But after another 3 years, we have another birth process. So 33 years until the deed on Golgotha, Easter. But because it's Christmas to Easter, it's not just 33 years, but 33 1/3. So I think it's just important to be aware of this together in starting this evening and thinking again of this period, this rhythm of time, because it is a rhythm of 3 times the years that the Christ being was connected to the Jesus child, and then connected to the earth, and until the deed on Golgotha. So we have 33 and a third years as a cycle of time, which is not a rhythm that is usually celebrated. We celebrate 10 years, 15 years, 25 years, whatever. It doesn't really have any big meaning anymore, what we tend to celebrate. But this does, because we are celebrating a cycle of 3 times these years of Christ, basically, and realizing how the Christ being has connected itself to the earth, but also in a very special way. And let's turn straight away to the foundation stone meditation, because there we do hear how the Christ being has connected to the earth, that he lives in the time rhythms. And of course, you know this central verse of the 3 verses, where we hear how the human soul lives in the lungs and the heart, in the rhythmic being of the human being. And that is, I think, very important to realize that in the foundation stone, this foundation stone is laid into the heart, of course, but into the earthly being of the humans who were there at the Christmas Foundation meeting, but also this possibility is still available for us today, that we take this foundation stone into our hearts too. It is something which is not bound to one historic point somewhere, but something which is a continuum, so to speak. We are today also able to be the ground of this foundation stone laying. So they're the very central part where our soul links to the rhythmic part of our being. There we hear, human soul, you live within the beat of heart and lung, which through the rhythms of time leads you into your own soul being's feeling. And so this leads us into this space where we hear a little bit later, of course, this is the space of the Christ being. For the Christ will in the surrounding circle holds sway, bestowing grace upon souls in the rhythms of worlds. So, yes, the Christ being has connected with this earth, but in a very particular way, to the rhythmic being of the earth, to the way in which the earth lives in rhythms, and we can connect also to these rhythms through our true feeling, or I like to say through our true sensing. The thing we practice in this second part of the foundation stone, I think it's good to say practice spirit sensing. It's sometimes translated differently, but I think this sensing, to feel, it's a path of feeling which is spoken of here. And that is where we can connect to the Christ being in the rhythms of the world. Our rhythm can connect to the rhythms of the world. Is that not what the calendar of the soul is about fundamentally? Surely this is the path of the calendar of the soul. It was given 12 years before the foundation stone, and yet these 12 years were already a preparation, or at least a possibility for preparation for people to become the ground into which this foundation stone could be laid. Whether that happened in the right way or not, I don't want to speak about that, but I think this is what was given with the calendar of the soul, this path of preparation. And it is, of course, still valid today as this path to connect our feeling self to the rhythms of the world. And in this, connecting very definitely, very closely to the Christ being in our time. Now, if we ask where Rudolf Steiner actually spoke about these things, because this is the way it happens, isn't it? We know this is what he said, but when did he actually say this? You know, then one tends to forget, of course, when was that and when was that? Well, it was this very special lecture he gave, which he gave the title Et Incarnatus Est. So interesting that he gave a Latin title to this lecture. And in this lecture, he speaks about the rhythms of 33 and a third years. That has become the rhythm of history, so to speak. So it's a question when we live in this year 2023, 2024 now. What happened 33 and a third years ago? What happened 2 times 33 and a third years ago? And what happened 3 times 33 and a third years ago? And to realize that that actually is a historic impulse. It is something which lives in the rhythms of time, which we can take up in a very particular way using this historic rhythm. There is let's say a door, a window which is opening now, which allows us again to connect to what happened 3 times 33 and a third years ago. But not only that, if we do take these impulses up, which are living in the rhythms of the time, if we take these up, if we bring these into our daily practice, into our life, if we try to realize these impulses today to become the ground for the foundation stone, then we can be sure that in turn, we are preparing the next 33 and a third years. It is not a celebration that, you know, one celebrates Christmas and then a day later it's over, or New Year's Eve, you know, you go and have a drink and then it's finished, and sing Auld Lang Syne if you happen to live in Scotland, but otherwise it's finished then, you know. We live so short term. We think that Christmas is finished after a couple of days. No, it is, of course, something which continues within the flow of time, within the rhythms of time. And what we can put into this, what we can put our will to, particularly, can live more strongly for the next 33 and a third years at least, but definitely in this time. We are looking forward. If we do something today, if we have an impulse, a real impulse today, connect ourselves with our will to something today, then it lives into the time of the next 33 and a third years. Quite independent of the fact if I'm still alive in 33 and a third years, but this impulse will live in the rhythms of time. So there, so to speak, we can help that the fruits of the foundation stone actually continue to ripen, if I may use this image. It is not to celebrate it and say, you know, this is a wonderful event of history and how wonderful that it happened. No, the question is, can we really help this impulse to ripen into the future, to become part of the life forces of this earth. And of course, the life forces of this earth are in great need. It is of importance that we give something out of our inner work to the life rhythms of the earth. And so, of course, to everyone living on the earth. But there you see, if we look back at this connection between Christmas and Easter, can say, of course, without Easter, the birth at Christmas would not have been possible. It actually culminates in this deed of Golgotha, of course. It is a totality of mystery action, mystery happening in this time between the first Christmas and the first Easter, 33.5 years. But in a similar way, we can also look at what we've already occupied ourselves with, the fire of the Goetheanum, and be sure that this fire belongs to the mystery of anthroposophy, of anthroposophia, the being of anthroposophy. Without the fire in the Goetheanum, I dare to say, the foundation stone would not have been possible. This preparation for the foundation stone, for the Christmas foundation meeting, to this preparation, many, many things belong. And one of those things is the fire of the Goetheanum. That this seed of the Goetheanum can actually enter the space of the etheric in a very particular way. So exactly like we can say, yes, of course, evil is at work at Easter time, that the Christ being is crucified is a deed of evil. And yet without the crucifixion, we would not be able to connect to the Christ being today. And similarly, we can say, without the fire of the Goetheanum, as evil as that also was, also the resurrection of the Goetheanum in our time would not be possible. Now, if we look at this Easter time in the calendar of the soul now, we're still in Christmas, and I would nevertheless like us to turn to the Easter time in the calendar of the soul and realize what a mystery lies in the fact that we have these two verses, so to speak, in the cycle of the year next to each other, Holy Week and Easter Week, that belong so inwardly, so completely together, and yet between them is the biggest abyss we can imagine. The biggest jump from one week to the next is from Holy Week, of course, to Easter week. It is the beginning of the calendar of the soul. Therefore, the Holy Week is, so to speak, the end of the calendar of the soul, and yet it is, of course, the preparation for the following year. And so we have in this deed of Easter, for our path of practice, this archetype of two verses which belong so strongly together and yet are completely diametrically opposite. Just as we as human beings have this duality of being an earthly being and a spiritual being, and have to ask ourselves how we bridge these two worlds within our being. And of course, it is the soul itself which is this bridge between the earthly being and the spirit being. And now, if we, of course, those of you who have seen the pictures by Karl König for the Calendar of the Soul, you'll realize how often he uses the image of the bridge throughout these pictures to demonstrate how continuously a bridge needs to be built. And in fact, in this very special verse before Michaelmas, where we, in the picture by Karl König, we have a series of 3 bridges even, then we realize how important it is continuously, not just once, but continuously to build the bridge to the Spirit. So the 24th verse, read the beginning at least. Constant self-creation serves soul self-perception. So my self-perception, my understanding also of the human being relies on constant self-creation, creating our soul again and again and again. The soul being is not something which is finished, but which is continuously in fluidum, is in movement, is in transformation. The question is if we are the transformers, if we are those who stand behind this transformation. Steadily, the Spirit strives in self-consciousness revitalized, letting spring from soul's darknesses through self-assurance fruit of will. And there you see in this Michaelmas time, this fruit of will in the calendar of the soul. Self-consciousness revitalized. You see, yes, in the Michaelmas time, we pick up in a new way the event of Easter. Michaelmas is an inner Easter festival. So that is where we can take hold of the forces of rejuvenation, revitalization for the soul. And so we are in this journey that begins at Easter throughout the year to this fulfillment of revitalization. And I would like just to remind us of these 2 Easter verses briefly, because I always think this is like the portal of entry into this path of practice of the calendar of the soul. And I always hear the trombones and the trumpets and the French horn with their fanfare of us entering this pathway and encouraging us. Yes, Michaelmas courage already at Easter to take this path. And we hear in the Easter verse, when from the world's wide realms the sun to human beholding speaks, and gladness rising from soul depths unites with light in seeing. When, we can also say if, of course, if the sun is able to speak to the human being. And this has to stay a question in our time. Yes, the sun speaks, or as Goethe says in Faust, of course, the sun sings. But are we able to hear it, is the question. And that is this path of the calendar of the soul. And just to remind us of the verse, which is the culmination of this path, the 52nd verse. Of course, it stands next to the Easter verse, and yet is the culmination of this path. Then we are just the opposite. When from the depths of soul, the spirit turns to the life of worlds, and beauty wells from widths of space. Then, you see, if and then, or when from the depths of soul, if from the depths of soul, the spirit turns to the life of worlds. If that happens, then from farthest heavens, life force flows into human form. That is a big event, that through Easter, through this death process, also life force flows into human form. And there again, I think it's important that we see in the translation of the words by Rudolf Steiner, he really does mean the human form, the human body. In German, he says, des Lebenskraft im Menschenleiber. Just as in the foundation stone, we are looking at this bridge of the soul between the spirit and the human body, the threefold human body. So within the calendar of the soul, we have this path to find new life forces flowing into the human body. And I do think this is very important because in the first verse, the entry, so to speak, into the calendar of the soul, the begin of this path of practice, we hear that the human being is bound dimly with spirit being. Dimly. Yes, I think we have to realize that's where we are. We sort of feel something, and especially if we've studied plenty of lectures by Rudolf Steiner, then we do sense something, but our connection to the spirit world, sorry if maybe I should just say this for myself, I don't want to expect that everybody is in the same place as I am, but certainly I feel that my connection to the spirit is rather dim and needs to be illumined. Is that not our task in anthroposophy, in approaching the threshold, just as the old man with the lamp enters the temple under the earth, and begins to enlighten the temple? So we have to begin to light up the spirit world for ourselves. For us, it is dark, but that is only for us. In effect, the spirit world is not dark, of course, but for our consciousness, it is dark. And so this is part of the path of anthroposophy, surely, for our consciousness to lighten up the world beyond the threshold, that we may grasp, understand, see the events on the other side of the threshold. We are told we are dimly bound to the spirit being. So it's the first verse, it's the entry, it's the invitation to go this path. We wouldn't need to go it if the connection to the spirit was already enlightened. No, we have to light this flame, we have to kindle this light to lighten up the spirit world on the other side of the threshold. For our consciousness, of course. And then with the 52nd verse, we hear, in an amazing way, then from farthest heavens, life force flows into human form, uniting by its mighty strength, spirit essence with human life. So you see, that is the path we're taking, or at least one part of the path we are taking to reach to the spirit world, to reach across the threshold with light of consciousness, and there to find the forces of life which can rejuvenate not only ourselves, but the world itself. And there we can see the connection of the Christ being with the earth belongs in this 52nd week. It belongs not first of all, to Easter week, but to Holy Week, when the being of Christ enters the being of the earth, dies into, that is our present consciousness, dies into the being of the earth and connects with this etheric being of the earth. So you see, this rejuvenating takes place already in Holy Week, and not, first of all, with the resurrection. And so we find it in the calendar of the soul too. When from the depths of soul the spirit turns to the life of the world, that is this one task of anthroposophy that we do with all earnestness, as Rudolf Steiner says, turn to the life of the world through our depths of soul. Now, this brings us to the second point, because yes, we need to approach the spirit, the threshold, and that is what we do on this path towards St. John. From Easter to St. John's time, we are, so to speak, breathing out into this summertime and connecting to the spirit in this very special way, and therefore to ourselves. We are finding ourselves in the spirit world. That is the St. John's celebration. And what do we gain, or what do we experience in this festival of St. John, when we have reached up to the word itself in the surroundings of the earth, if I may put it like that? We have reached this realm where the Christ being actually lives in our time with St. John's. And then we experience something very particular. And I would like to point particularly to the 13th verse. This is, so to speak, going out of St. John's into the rest of the year. This 13th verse is very special. I would like to read it to you. And being now in senses heights, we have not left the earth behind. That is important too. We've had this question within the calendar of the soul too. Do not lose yourself to the light, and yet connect to the world word in the heights. So, therefore, with St. John's Festival, we are still firmly grounded. Being now in senses heights, now comes this wonderful word, there flames into depths of soul from worlds of spirit fire, the godly word of truth. I think this is the most amazing thing, that in these heights of St. John, this out of the world of fire. What is the world of fire? We leave that as a question, but something is entering the human soul from this world of spirit fire. And that's what we are told in this verse 13 of the calendar of the soul. It flames into the depths of our soul. That's it's a strong verse. We have to realize how this belongs to the fire. This word of truth is a word of fire. And what does this word speak to us? With prescience seek in spirit grounds to find yourself in spirit kinship. So there we have this one side of the journey through the year. And maybe, Andre, we can look at the picture that Karl König drew for this week, for the 13th week. Can you show us that? There we go. Many of you know it already. And I think it is very important for the theme we have today, because in these heights of spirit where the world word speaks to the soul of the human being, Karl König draws this picture, and let me say, this is of course my understanding of this picture. It's very difficult to interpret a work of art in this way, but I think it is pretty clear that this figure in Greek dress is on one shore of the sea, and on the other shore behind him is the temple of Ephesus, which is burning. The mysteries of pre-Christian times are burning, are no longer available for the human being. The human being needs to connect directly. And there you see our, I say our, because of course the calendar of the soul is our path. And maybe we can see ourselves in this figure. We are reaching up as almost as a beggar for the spirit, as Rudolf Steiner calls it in one place. We are no longer able to connect to the old mysteries. We're no longer guided by the ancient mysteries. We have to be beggars for spirit. And here we reach to the heights and ask of the spirit for this direct connection. And you can see, what else could spirit flames be? How can the world of spirit fire flame into the depths of our soul, imaginatively speaking, other than through this stroke of lightning, which seems to fill this human being? And that, I think, is the situation of the human being after the burning of Ephesus. That is on the other side of the sea, and on this, which is Asia Minor, of course, it's Asia. Whereas on this side of the water, we have the beginnings of the European culture. We have the beginning of in the end, the fifth cultural epoch. The time in which we stand now begins at this moment, where the temple of Ephesus burns and we find ourselves on this rocky shore. And this is all behind us. We can only pray for grace that we may be given this spirit flame for the future. And before us, the grass can be green. I always think this belongs a little bit to the feeding of the 5,000, where we are told in the gospel, and they lay down on the green grass. That word surely has a meaning for the fifth cultural epoch, that through our taking in of spiritual nourishment, we are also able to replenish, to re-nourish and rejuvenate the earth itself. And so there we stand as St. John's people, so to speak, in our time, looking into the future and asking if we will be able to bring the Spirit not only to ourselves, but to bring it to the earth, which needs it dearly. That is our situation after Ephesus for the fifth cultural epoch. That is St. John, the caller in the desert, which we see here. And we remember that the Goetheanum was actually the St. John's building. And just during the Christmas Foundation meeting, Rudolf Steiner talks again and again about the Temple of Ephesus. We can see how the burning of the Goetheanum belongs also into this rhythm for humanity. That we again, as human beings today, where this temple of the word, the temple of St. John actually had been built in Dornach, that this has also been a sacrifice to the flames. And now we are again beggars for the Spirit and can only rely on our own path to take in the Spirit word. That is the path of the calendar of the soul. But to take in this flame of Spirit truth is not, as I say, to warm ourselves. And this is the second reality for the anthroposophic path of development. It is not for us, of course. It is because the earth needs it. We are to take in this spirit being. It must take root in the threefold being of our body through our soul, so that we may work into the world around us. That is this cross of St. John. And Andre, maybe you want to take that picture down now, and perhaps you can see behind me that I have the cross where these four pictures are. We have at the top the picture, the 13th picture, and there you can see that it is important for now, right now, for this time in the Holy Nights, because the picture for this week is just next to me here. We are in this 13th cross again now, at the time of the new year, with Rudolf Steiner speaks about World New Year. And I think this has to do with it. This picture of St. John, we are St. John in our time, so to speak. And now we are in this 39th week of the year. And we see how this has hopefully grown within us, this question. Because now this 39th verse, the verse for this week, tells us, devoted to spirit revelation. So that is a statement, devoted to spirit revelation. As we do not forget the outer world, we don't leave that behind us, and yet we are devoted also to spirit revelation. I gain world beings light. You see this flame. Power of thought now grows, becoming clear, to give myself to me, and to me appears through thinking's might an awakening feeling of myself. So this deed of, oh, thank you. Yes, so you see on the right-hand side the picture for this week's verse, the 39th picture. And there we see that, so to speak, in a first fulfillment of this mood of St. John's, we are able through Christmas time now to be devoted to spirit revelation, and therefore to become a vessel for this world being's light, which we see in the St. John's in the 13th verse, this light from spirit. I gain world being's light. Thank you, Deborah, for bringing this cross. And of course, we could talk much more about this transformation that takes place. And you just saw, I'd like to hint to the fact that in the 4th verse of this cross, we have the butterfly, the very picture of transformation of the soul. So, verse 39, that's this verse taking in the world light into our being. And what happens next week, dear friends, when we follow the calendar of the soul to the 40th verse next week, this is the verse for Three Kings. Then we hear, so this week devoted to spirit revelation, and next week, and being now in spirit depths. You remember the 52nd verse? Out of the spirit depths, something can flow. Now I am in spirit depths. There flows in the grounds of my soul from the heart's world of love, filling the empty illusion of self, the world words, fiery power. It's almost unbelievable that in these two Christmas verses, the New Year's verse and the Three Kings verse, we have these two elements of light and fire, warmth. Devoted to spirit revelation, I gain world being's light. Power of thought now grows. And next week, being now in spirit depths, there flows in the grounds of my soul from the heart's world of love, filling the empty illusion of self, the world words fiery power. And there we see this turnaround, so to speak, through the spirit birth at Christmas time. This turnaround that we devote ourselves, we are devoted to spirit revelation. We devote ourselves now to the earth which needs us. We remember verse 33, where we heard of the death process of the earth. Without the human being, the earth will and must die. It can only rejuvenate itself through souls. It is quite clear. And there you see this turnaround takes place just at Christmas, the New Year's verse and the Three Kings verse, that spirit light can fill us and transform our thinking, and spirit warmth can develop the force of love, which is necessary not only to be warm ourselves, the spirit clothing that we have put on through the path of the calendar of the soul is not to keep us warm in winter, but it is actually that we may be active for the world. We may bring this wealth of light and warmth to the earth. So that is the second part of the anthroposophical path, and that differentiates the anthroposophical path from, I think, just about everything else. Yes, we need to connect to the spirit, but at the same time, we need to take on board this inner foundation stone, so to speak, to give the fire of spirit in love to the world. And there we see how in the fourth part of the foundation stone, of course, we have these elements. At the turning point of time, the spirit light of the world entered the stream of earth existence. But now, light divine, this is the call. Light divine, Christ, Son, warm our hearts, enlighten our heads. Why? Not that we become kings or that we stay warm through winter. No, that good may become what we from our hearts are founding, what we from our heads direct out of will. So that's a ripening of the forces of the will, but in the sense of love. The earth is to become the planet of love. And that is our task, not only, of course, as anthroposophists, but as human beings. It is our task that the earth becomes the planet of love. And that is this turnaround that we can already find in the part of practice of the calendar of the soul, and which echoes, of course, at Christmas time in the foundation stone, very deeply. Take in this light to transform your thinking, but create warmth that love may flow to the world, that good may become. You see, it is our will which is needed on the earth, our deed, not just our thinking, not just our warmth of feeling, but our deed. And so we can say that this transformation from 1923, from this Christmas event, which was the New Year's event, of course, it was the New Year's night where the fire burned the Goetheanum. But that was transformed then through Rudolf Steiner, of course, to 1924 Christmas. That is an incredible transformation, but we can find it in the calendar of the soul. That the fire may really become a new impulse, spirit fire. Just like when the temple of Ephesus burnt, this was to become a new impulse for the human being, to connect to the spirit in an individualized way, but also in all humility as beggars of the spirit, so to speak. This spirit fire is an impulse of love. And I would just remind you, that's not the theme for today, but in this situation in 1923, or during the transition from 1923 to 1924, when Anna Sandweber said to Rudolf Steiner, she was one who saw the Goetheanum in flames long before the fire took place. She knew she had to be there for this Christmas time, 1923, and she was there. And she was able to assist after the fire, to be one of the guardians of that space. And Rudolf Steiner gave her a verse. She was sent back to Berlin to the friends there and given a verse to take with her, which is a verse of fire. I don't want to speak about that now because that would need another 2 hours to speak about it. And I don't think you have more time at the moment. But I do think this is an important verse to look at. It's just called For the Berlin Friends, I believe. And this has to do with this transformation of fire to love. And the lecture in which Rudolf Steiner gave this wisdom about world rhythms, about the 33 and a third year rhythm, et incarnatus est, you see, it has to do with the incarnation of the word. That is what it's about. And this was in the depths of wartime in 1917. And I would actually very much like to just read a paragraph out of this very special lecture. It's the 23rd of December, 1917, a Christmas lecture. So right at the end of the lecture, he's spoken about these cosmic rhythms of 33 and a third years and how the Christ being has connected itself to the earth. Such things, my dear friends, should not encourage pride in mere theoretical knowledge. They achieve value only when they are expressed in practical deeds. When our souls become so filled with conviction concerning them that we can do nothing but to act according to their light. Now, this is 1917, long before the foundation stone, but you sense may be that these words of the foundation stone were living in Rudolf Steiner in a special way, at least during the time 1911, 1912 of the calendar of the soul, which is so deeply connected to the etheric Christ being. And now in 1917, when the earth is in such great need, the humans are in such great need, again, he comes to this light. Only then is the soul filled with love for the great being for whom the deeds in this light are done. Then this love becomes a concrete thing, filled with cosmic warmth, and quite distinct from that sentimental affectation that we find today on all lips, but that has led in these catastrophic times to some of the greatest impulses of hatred among humanity. And I think if we speak about these impulses of light and love today, we can only do so with a knowing about the hatred living on earth today. Quite distinct from that sentimental affectation which we call love, and we find today on all lips, but that has led in these catastrophic times to some of the greatest impulses of hatred among humanity. Humanity, however, must also ask, what must we seek in the spiritual world in order to find that which is lost? That love that rules and lives warmingly in all beings, but is only real love when it wells up from a vital understanding of life. To love one another is to understand the other. Love does not mean filling one's heart with egoistical warmth that overflows in sentimental speeches. To love means to comprehend the being for whom we should do things, to understand not merely with the intellect, but through our innermost being, to understand with the full nature and essence of our human being. And both, of course, the calendar of the soul and the foundation stone meditation are paths to this understanding of the human being which can bring true love. The calendar of the soul is a path of feeling self-recognition, feeling human understanding. That is what Rudolf Steiner writes in the preface, particularly in the preface which he wrote for the First World War, for the books that went to the trenches. We see the parallel to our times. The foundation stone, Rudolf Steiner also called the stone of love. And on January the 1st, when Rudolf Steiner was closing the foundation, the Christmas Foundation meeting, and departing and saying goodbye to people in this very last lecture, the 1st of January 1924, he speaks how flames of the fire of the Goetheanum must be transformed to become spirit fire that we carry into the world. And we see how necessary that is today, that this spirit fire can engender true love in the human soul for the world which is so filled with hatred around us. Now, one more thing I would like to bring this evening, it is here this afternoon or this morning, depending where you all are. This was not the last word of fire that Rudolf Steiner spoke, but of course it was the seed of love which he wanted to plant into human hearts. And yet, in 1925, shortly before his death, he gave perhaps one of the last verses he gave. And this verse is also a verse of fire. You will remember 1925, on his deathbed, he republished the Calendar of the Soul, published for the first time in the form we know it. And in the same year, 1925, at the same time, towards the end of his life, he gave this verse, and I believe it is very unique because of the many, many, many verses Rudolf Steiner gives. He does not speak of himself like he does here. It begins with the word I. And I believe this is the only verse which begins with the word I, meaning I, Rudolf Steiner. I'll read this verse to you. I want with cosmic spirit to enthuse each human being, that a flame they may become, and fiery will unfold the essence of their being. The other ones, they strive to take from cosmic waters what will extinguish flames and pour paralysis into all inner being. O joy, when human beings' flame is blazing, even when at rest. O bitter pain, when the human thing is put in bonds, when it wants to stir. Those of you who know this verse, I hope you can live with my translation of it. But there were certain things in this verse that were so important to me. I wanted them to be expressed in this way in the English language. And we find something here which certainly also lives in this end of the Christmas Foundation meeting, this very special lecture which he gave, a fairly short lecture of saying goodbye to everybody, closing down the Foundation Stone meeting. And there, of course, he spoke the Foundation Stone meditation directly. But in this talk, he says that it is actually not a great problem within anthroposophy, at least, or for human beings today, to reach to the spirit. But to reach to the spirit and return to the earth, that is not so easy. So that is one of the tasks of the guardian of the threshold, to be sure that we do not lose ourselves in the light of the spirit. You hear these words of the Calendar of the Soul. Lose yourself only in order to find yourself. But there in this lecture of January the 1st, Rudolf Steiner reminds us we should not lose ourselves to the spirit, but be sure to bring this spirit fire to earth. Exactly what he says there. If we do not approach the spirit in the right way in order to bring it to earth, then the word he uses is we will be paralyzed when we do return to earth. And that is exactly what he puts into this verse at the end of his life, to remind in a very special way of his own task on earth, to bring this path of feeling self-recognition, this, in this sense, also a Christmas path. We saw in the center of this Christmas event the New Year's verse and the Three Kings verse that bring these elements of light and fire. To realize our task is to bring the fiery power of the world's word through love of heart. This task to bring us this path of possible transformation, which is not so very difficult, although it's difficult to understand, of course. We can't understand the verses, but never mind, we can still live with them. And it is a path of feeling. And then this culmination in 1924 and into 1925, the verse for the foundation stone, which is then picked up in 1925. This verse I would like to read once more. I want, with cosmic spirit, to enthuse each human being, that a flame they may become, and fiery will unfold the essence of their being. The other ones, they strive to take from cosmic waters what will extinguish flames and pour paralysis into all inner being. Oh, joy, when human beings' flame is blazing, even when at rest. The joy that we hear in the first and last verses of the Calendar of the Soul. Oh, joy, when the human being's flame is blazing, even when at rest. Oh, bitter pain, when the human thing is put in bonds, when it wants to stir. Well, thank you, dear friends. I would like to leave you with these words going into this new year and, of course, going into difficult times and reminding us maybe of these words of Rudolf Steiner, which were not meant for paradisical times. They were meant for difficult times. It was not so that Rudolf Steiner didn't realize what difficulties were approaching at the time of the Christmas Foundation meeting. He knew very exactly what was happening. He had also suffered personally under the political situation, the social situation in Central Europe already. So he is giving these words into the difficulties of that time, and I believe also into the hatred of our times, that we may become that flame and fiery unfold the essence of our own being. Thank you.
Dear Richard, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. So now we have time for questions. But I'm wondering if you can take 1 minute or two for a short break so you can restore your voice and people can stretch limbs and have a sip of water. So, dear friends, we'll be back in 1-2 minutes, please. Okay, so dear friends, we are back. Yeah, please keep in mind it's already 16 minutes after 10 p.m. in Berlin area, so we cannot keep our dear speaker so long. It's already late in Central Europe. Yeah, do you know how to raise your electronic hand, right? So reactions in the bottom of your screen, just click on it, and then next button, it will be raise hand. Okay, so please be sure with your questions. So, okay, and Nicola is first. Nicola, yeah, welcome. Please unmute your machine.
Thank you, Richard. Mine is a very short question. It's just where there was one of the quotes that you gave was not actually, from the Calendar of the Soul, was where Steiner speaks about loving being to comprehend another and to understand what we can do for another. I haven't got the words quite right, but
Yeah, that is in this lecture, Et Incarnatus Est.
Right, thank you.
In 1917. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. I shall look that. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Margaret.
Yes, I was wondering if you could sort of repeat again or rephrase what he was saying about love, that it wasn't the egoistic feeling you have in your heart. If you could sort of expand on that or repeat what he has said about that.
Yeah, well, I think it's to put it in a picture, this warmth of spirit is not, so to speak, to warm myself. That is not the reason for taking in this spirit light, to feel my own warmth. That is of course, the temptation of Lucifer. But that in actual fact, and we do find that again and again and again within the Calendar of the Soul too, that we need to take this path because it's needed by the world. And of course, we see the needs of the world very immediately around us. That is not the problem. But the problem is that we tend to see these two things separate. There's the horrible world out there with terrible things happening that doesn't really touch me so strongly because, I'm okay. I'm pretty warm and I can do things that fulfill me. But we really need to see how this light and warmth that Rudolf Steiner is speaking about is an immediate healing power in the world of our time. That is a reality. And it's, of course, not easy to see because there will not be peace tomorrow if we, but, probably if enough people meditated the foundation stone around the world, maybe there would, maybe there would be peace tomorrow. Certainly it is a contribution, and that is what we need to turn to, that it is a reality, and the transformation we can be part of is, of course, transforming ourselves. So not to enjoy things, but to transform because the world needs it. I think that's the basic problem, to see that the anthroposophical inner path we can't understand any other way. And in the beginning of knowledge of higher worlds in this book, Rudolf Steiner makes clear to us, you can only take this path if you realize that it's needed by the world. It's not that we enjoy life more. And of course, as anthroposophists, we know very well that the world doesn't get, or our own life doesn't necessarily just get easier that way. We tend to be more aware of the problems and the strife and shortcomings by taking this path than if we ignore it. So we know that it's no good expecting that we will have a comfortable life if we meditate enough. That is not what it's about.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Leon, next. Leon.
Hi, everyone. I want you all to know that a speaker and I have a background with Oxford. And one of the things that appeals to me very much in reflecting on Oxford is the motto of the university. The Lord is my light. It comes from the 27th Psalm. And like many of David's Psalms, it continues by saying, I need fear nothing. And it gives me strength to know that it's kind of there in my background and so on. When you look at the motto of Oxford, it has a picture of the ox crossing the ford, and it says strength in truth. It reminds me of what's going on in Harvard right now, because it talks about the motto of Harvard is veritas, truth, and yet there's no courage coming from the top there. So I kind of lost my track a bit here.
Well, let me take over there, Leon, because yes, Oxford was, of course, founded by some very wise people.
I'm from monasteries, you know.
Yes,
There
yes.
were buildings in my college that were from that age. They were monastery cottages, and they were devout Christians.
Yeah.
And Harvard itself was founded by an Oxford graduate who was very Christian. But the other thing, if I might dare say it, that was pointed out to me one time I was expounding on my great commitment to the work of Rudolf Steiner. One of my teachers said, "You really love Rudolf Steiner, don't you?" and so it occurs to me very much that you and I share a love for Rudolf Steiner.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Leon. So Yaya, hello. Hi.
Hello, good evening or good morning or whatever. I just wanted to make 2 points. In one of the verses that you mentioned, and because I don't have the text, I'm using metaphors now. There is this image of water dampening the will and the flame of goodwill. And I have a strong feeling that one of the ways in which we are allowing this water to dampen our flame is by sitting comfortably and doing nothing. So when comfort becomes complacency, it also becomes co-responsible for all the atrocities that are happening around us. And the second point is, and again, I use a metaphor because I don't have the text. When the soul wishes to stir and instead it finds itself in a straitjacket, we do have the power to break free as individuals as well as society. And sometimes I ask myself, is it laziness or something else that prevents us from actually realizing the potential that we have of giving meaning to the word love and not using it in the way that is commonly used nowadays and even abused nowadays. These are the only 2 points that I wish to make, and I'm incredibly grateful for your presentation tonight. It's so significant in our times. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do think it's important to realize that what Rudolf Steiner speaks about with the being of love is something we still need to grasp. And you will probably also know that he gave this very, very special talk about the being of love, the meaning of love in our time. It is quite a singular lecture. It was given on the date, December the 14th, on which Caspar Hauser was murdered. And I think that is not just by chance. Rudolf Steiner was, of course, aware of such things and these impulses of hatred and impulses against the spirit in our times. He was very aware of that. To speak about the being of love in the way he did in that lecture, I think was quite a deed in itself. But it's quite a singular lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's on the date of the murder of Rudolf Steiner on December 14th, but 100 years after his birth, 1912. So certainly not.
The date of the murder of Caspar Hauser.
Sorry, yes. Yes. It's getting late already.
Yeah. Okay, dear friends, very short, please. So George is next.
Thanks. Thanks for your lecture there, Richard. It's certainly was a very fast hour. Time seemed to stop there. 2 things. One, I was wondering is, do you not think maybe we should start using the Greek terms for love? Eros, philo, agape, because that would clear a lot up in terms of, what does love mean? Eros is the self-seeking love, although of course we get the word erotic from it as well. Philo is the love we have when we're seeking something else, like in philosophy, but it's still conditional, whereas agape is the love that we give out, expecting nothing back. And I think it was Rudolf Steiner said that, there are actually very, very few deeds of love in the world, because
Yes.
the deeds that we perform, that we say are love, are usually for our own self-satisfaction. Anyway, so there was that. But the other thing I wanted to mention was that a lot of the content of your lecture is in the Lord's Prayer. I got hold of a book called The Calendar of Wisdom. I'll just put it up here. Can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
By Leo Tolstoy. And he said this was, in his view, his greatest work. And he spent his whole life collecting sayings and aphorisms of the great poets, artists, philosophers, religious leaders, and collecting them. And this, I think, was his last work, which he published. And he said it was his most important work. And it's been described as daily thoughts to nourish the soul, written and selected from the world's sacred texts. So it's a bit like the calendar of the soul. Every day has a theme, and he quotes, show you lots of little sayings. And it reminds me that Novalis had said that aphorisms are like pollen seeds waiting to implant the human mind or impregnate the human mind. So with regard to the Lord's Prayer and your talk, I came across on December 20th a saying by Giuseppe Mazzini. He was, I think, an Italian philosopher. And he says, in different ways and in different tongues, all humanity repeats the words of the Lord's Prayer. Let thy kingdom come on earth as it is on heaven. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's the will into the earth. I mean, so much. I wonder how many people, when they say the Lord's Prayer, realize that. And it's not going up to heaven, as our churches say, and living in eternity. It's down here. This is the words of Christ. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, which is what your talk was about.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Richard?
Yes, very brief, okay? We can all do something every day, and it depends on what shows up at our door. It can be little, because it's better to light one candle than curse the darkness. So in our own ways, and different things will present itself to us each day, we can always be doing something. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and Robin or Christopher?
It's me. I tend to be the noisy one of the two of us.
Hi.
Hi, Robin.
So
Let's see what I'm not sure what I do. I think
Yeah, go ahead.
thank you. So Richard, I have much gratitude I wish to express to you for what you have brought tonight. I hope others have heard all of, and I'm going to use the word breadcrumbs and puzzle pieces, that you have tied together in a form of lemniscate for us to bring all of this together, coming into that central point, which is the Christ impulse of all of these things, be it the foundation stone meditation, be it, as we heard, the Lord's Prayer, be it the calendar of the soul, and these burnings that have happened that have been part of our past and are signals for the present and the future for us. It is always such an honor to hear your thoughts that you bring to us. And I just wanted to let you know, again, it was the most beautiful spiritual nutrition that you brought to my heart today. So thank you again, Richard.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, Lois, she's raising her physical real hand. Lois, go ahead.
I can't find the button at the bottom. I'm sorry.
You are your witness.
I was out working today, getting back to work, and I was out at showrooms looking for products for people. And I got into an Uber to come home and tuned into the lecture on Uber on my cell phone. And I apologized to the Uber driver after I started it going, and he'd heard a few minutes of it. And he said, no, this is wonderful. What is this? I said, it's anthroposophy. And he said, what is that? I said, just listen. And this was the most beautiful exposition of what anthroposophy is at its very core. And this Uber driver was quiet as a mouse and listening carefully. And then he said, just as we're pulling up to my door, and it was quite a long ride, a good half-hour ride, 45 minutes. Pulling up to my door, he said, wow, that is amazing. Who is, I said, Rudolf Steiner, as you heard. And he said, the lecturer has such a wonderful voice. It is so soothing and calm and intelligent. He was going on, and I thought, yes, that's someone who's taken all of this into their soul, and it comes out in every way. So you got a big compliment from an Uber driver on not only the content, but the timbre of your voice. I thought I'd pass that along.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So, dear friends, because of so late, yeah, I'd like to say thank you to Richard for his wonderful presentation. And we have two more presentations for 12 Holy Nights. And next, it will be on January 4th. This young priest, Reverend Gina Lee, she will speak live here in Chicago, but also on Zoom. So I would like to invite you. And thank you so much for joining. And I'd like to, in the end, to pass again to Deborah Grace. Maybe she will tell more announcement for next or for future events in 2024 from Karl König Institute. So, dear Deborah, over to you. Yeah, please unmute your machine. Yeah.
Sorry.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Richard. Thank you all. I actually feel, because of the lecture and also because of the conversation and what people have offered in terms of their sense of how we need to be in these times, that I would like to end with sharing a quote from Rudolf Steiner. And Richard and I have the privilege, he much more than I, because I only speak English, of receiving lots of beautiful emails from people who share things with us. And we received for New Year's a beautiful email and image from a friend named Shani Young. And she included a quote from Rudolf Steiner, which many of you may know. It was quoted by Peter Zelk in his book. And I just feel that it speaks to us all and the tasks that lie ahead. So I would like to just close with that quote that Shani shared. This was given by Rudolf Steiner on June 16th, 1923. And it speaks, I think, to those of us who feel we are still part of this initial vanguard. When thousands are in the initial vanguard of a movement, these thousands have a higher, more potentized obligation. They have the obligation to practice in every detail greater courage, greater energy, greater patience, greater tolerance, and above all, greater truthfulness in all things. So, as a friend of mine said, may we carry all these greaters out into this new year. Thank you all, and thank you, Richard, and thank you, Andre, and the Chicago branch, and the world.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Dear friends, please unmute your gadgets and say a big thank you to Richard and Deborah, Karl König Institute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bless
Richard.
you.
Thank you,
Bless
and
you,
blessings
Richard.
for a beautiful new year.
Thank you, Richard. Good
Thanks,
as
Richard.
usual.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew.
Good night, dear friends. Bye-bye.
Good night.